Yuji's brand new form has just been revealed, and it all but confirms a theory we've all been wondering about since the end of chapter 238. At the end of this chapter, we see that Higuruma and Yuji burst onto the battlefield to take on the newly reincarnated Sukuna. Well, in the final panel of the chapter, we got a sneak peek at what some of his newfound abilities are. When he exposes his left arm, and it's all transformed with these long claws and some kind of sharpened bone sticking out of his elbow. Well, Gege recently blessed us with this awesome colored image of Yuji with a more detailed look at his new transformation. His hand and one side of his forearm are red. The other side of his forearm has this thick bone blade that ends at the elbow. So by this point, many of you are probably thinking, okay, he looks cool, but what the hell does that tell us about his new power-up? Well, that's what I'm here for. I did all the research for you, and I think I came up with a pretty damn good idea on what's causing this transformation for Yuji. And I'll just say right now that you should be pretty damn excited for what's to come in the manga. So let's get right into it. Well, like I described at the top, Yuji's arm seems to be armored up with this hardened flesh and has some bone protruding out of it. Almost gives you like an armored titan vibe, doesn't it? Well, the ability to harden and transform his flesh at will might be attributed to several new abilities working together, not just one, each of which were actually already teased like 20 chapters ago. Gege loves to tease after all, doesn't he? The first of which is a theorized new ability that you've probably heard like a million times by now, soul manipulation. In chapter 220, Choso hands Yuji a book that Yuki left him before she died, a book that held all of her research on the soul. A few chapters later, we see that Yuji might have learned a thing or two from that book since we saw him training with Kusakabe, but the twist there seemed that he had swapped bodies with him somehow. The soul swapping aspect of what he probably learned from that book isn't what we're going to be focused on here though, because that ability is likely an extension of what Yuji truly learned. And what he truly learned is how to manipulate his own soul. Much like Mahito with his idol transfiguration, where he was able to manipulate souls to create transfigured humans. Remember, from him we learned that the body and the soul were one and the same. So if you learn how to manipulate your own soul, you can transform your own body as you see fit. And it seems like Yuji can do that now, but that's only one part of it. We also have to remember that in the same conversation where Choso gave the book to Yuji, Yuji also mentioned that he was sorry about their brothers, referring to the Cursed Womb death paintings. Choso then responds by saying, "It's okay, they'll live on through you." This was a clear tease to the possibility that Yuji consumed the remaining 6 Cursed Womb death paintings that Choso snatched up from the cursed warehouse at Jujutsu High. Eating these death paintings provide Yuji 2 potentially major power-ups. The first was actually pointed out by Gege himself in an interview. In this interview, Gege mentioned that consuming the death paintings would allow Yuji to absorb them as pure cursed energy, growing his cursed energy reserves exponentially. Along with this, he likely inherited the abilities of the death paintings as well, which is how he's able to transform his arm the way that he can. And there's surprisingly a ton of lore that goes behind the Cursed Womb death paintings in general. The death paintings are actually a reference to the 9-phase diagram, which is a Buddhist series of 9 paintings, each of which depicts a stage of death and decomposition of a corpse. The first few paintings in the series depict the body secreting these bodily fluids, including blood and toxins, as it decomposes, which might be the inspiration for the first 3 death paintings we see, Choso, Iso, and Kechizu. The next few stages depict the body fully decomposing and then becoming scattered bones. If Gege continues paying homage to the 9-phase diagram, I would not be surprised if Yuji has some kind of bone manipulation ability to reflect the final stages of the 9-phase diagram. And when I was thinking about this, I honestly pictured Kimimaro from Naruto. A similar ability for Yuji would be pretty damn awesome because that would let him like shoot bone arrows out, give him a second layer of attack power to his repertoire, because right now he's really into close combat, old-fashioned fisticuffs pretty much, so it would be nice to potentially add a medium to long range ability to his arsenal. It makes even more sense considering that red blood cells in the human body are produced through bone marrow. It's all connected. Gege actually loves to use real-life science to explain some of the abilities he creates in the story, like for example how Kashimo's cursed energy charges work. Kind of complicated, but really cool once you actually understand it. It usually pays off. Well, assuming that Yuji has also inherited blood and bone manipulation abilities from the 6 death paintings he consumed, I'd put my money that the armor that Yuji has here is a combination of these abilities and his new soul manipulation ability. First, he manipulates his own soul to change the shape of his arm. He does this to form the claws that he has on his hand now and the bone blade on his elbow. He would be able to pull this off without much experience because he had absorbed the death paintings with those bone manipulation curse techniques. The fact that Yuji consumed them and added their essence to his own soul and cursed energy means pulling this ability off would be easier since it's etched into his soul by now. And it may sound crazy, but I think we have the specific name of the cursed womb death painting brother that actually will give Yuji this ability. That's because in chapter 138, when Choso mentioned collecting his brothers, he mentioned the name Shoso specifically. And in the 9-phase diagram that we just talked about earlier, the first step of the 9-phase diagram is called Choso, and the 9th step in the 9-phase diagram, where the body is pretty much just decomposed bone, that stage is called Shoso. So the fact that Choso's name dropping a specific brother here means that he's going to have some kind of relevance later. Next, he uses his own blood to create the red armor that covers his arm. We've actually already seen something similar to this be pulled off. We see in Choso's fight with Yuji during the Shibuya incident, he uses his blood manipulation to perform the flowing red scale stack. With this ability, Choso manipulates the blood inside of his own body to create this hardened shell of blood around his arms, or honestly wherever he needs some extra protection. We also learned from Choso that he can convert his own cursed energy into blood, so he'll never have to worry about dying from blood loss or using too much blood with his curse technique if he still has cursed energy. If Yuji can do a similar thing, he can also create hardened shells of blood on his body and reinforce it with his bone manipulation. This means that Yuji might also be able to use flowing red scale, using it to increase his speed and strength to an already higher level than he already has with his superhuman body. At its core, flowing red scale is simply pumping blood into your body faster to create more red blood cells. So this would also allow Yuji to enhance his ocular muscles to follow Sukuna's insane speed, much like how Choso did against Naoya Zenin. Now at this point, you might be thinking that being able to do all this would require Yuji to have multiple curse techniques. I mean, dude didn't even have one the entire series. This is all not even mentioning the soul swapping he likely has and the fact that he still might finally be able to use Sukuna's curse technique. Well, not exactly. Considering he absorbed the death paintings into his body and soul, this means that the properties of their curse techniques are also absorbed and make it easier for him to understand and replicate now. This is because the information that he learned from Yuki's book about the soul has probably deepened his understanding of it greatly. Going back to Mahito again for a second, he did mention that Yuji was his natural enemy because being a host to two souls, his and Sukuna's, made him more aware of his own soul to begin with. So Yuji technically had a head start in all this. Think of Yuji absorbing the death paintings and being able to use their curse technique somehow, in a similar way to how Geto's curse technique lets him absorb curses, then use their curse techniques himself. You also gotta remember that all these power buffs that he might be getting is not even mentioning the soul swapping he likely has, and the fact that he still might finally be able to use Sukuna's curse technique. That being said, we might be in for a much more competitive fight between Yuji and Sukuna than we originally thought, and I am all here for it.